Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. Story 1. Red-Eyed Visitor.
When I was 6 years old, I had an experience that still haunts me to this day. I do not know if it was a dream, sleep paralysis, or something far worse, but I remember every detail as if it happened yesterday. I used to sleep in my parents' bed, feeling safe and secure. One night, I woke up unexpectedly. The lamp was on, which was strange because my parents always turned off all the lights before going to bed. The soft glow cast long, eerie shadows across the room. As I sat up, I noticed something at the foot of the bed. It was not human. A pure white figure stood motionless. It had no discernible features except for two enormous glowing red eyes with a faint yellow tinge around them. The colors were unnaturally bright, almost too vivid to belong to this world. The figure had no mouth, no nose, and no arms that I could see. It was just standing there staring at me. My body froze. I wanted to scream, to wake my parents, but no sound came out. It felt like an eternity, though it must have been only a few seconds. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Every instinct told me to hide. With trembling hands, I pulled my blanket over my head, shutting my eyes tight. I told myself that if I could not see it, maybe it would go away. I waited. The silence stretched on, the air thick with an unexplainable dread. Finally, I dared to peek out. It was right in front of my face. Its enormous red eyes bored into mine, mere inches away. My breath caught in my throat, my body seized with terror. Before I could react, I yanked the blanket back over my head, squeezing my eyes shut, praying that it would be gone. The last thing I remember was overwhelming fear. The next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The lamp was off. The room was normal again. When I told my mother what had happened, she looked genuinely unsettled. She did not brush it off as a nightmare. She seemed afraid. I have never seen that creature again, but I have never forgotten it either. Was it a dream, a trick of my young mind, or did I truly see something not of this world? To this day, I still wonder.
Story 2. The Haunted Dorm and the Broken Mirror.
I attended college in a town with a small history of hauntings and paranormal activity. The dormitory I stayed in during my second year had burned down nearly a century prior, tragically trapping one girl inside. It was rebuilt, but something about the place always felt wrong. People whispered about strange occurrences, objects falling from shelves, doors opening on their own, lights flickering. Our room and the one directly above it were the most active. The dorm had an odd layout, split into two sections by a dividing column and a half wall. A large mirror was fastened to that wall with 4 screwed-in clasps. Another mirror was secured on the far side of the room. One October night, my roommates and I decided to sleep early, around 10 or 11 p.m. Our fourth roommate was off campus, staying with his girlfriend. I was the last one to fall asleep. The room was locked, lights off, and no one was moving. At exactly 1:30 a.m., a deafening crash jolted us awake. We turned on the lights, hearts racing, and saw the mirror from the half wall shattered into hundreds of pieces on the floor. The door was still locked. No one had entered or left. The mirror, secured by the clasps, should not have fallen. We tested the other mirror. It was impossible to remove without physically twisting the clasps. Something had forcefully removed it. Nervous but intrigued, we downloaded a ghost radar app as a joke. The app displayed a radar with random words appearing every few seconds. As soon as I opened it, the first word that appeared was mirror. 30 seconds later, fire. The last word it displayed was stuck. Chills ran through me. The girl in the fire, was she trying to tell us something? Terrified, we deleted the app and left the dorm to stay in a friend's room. The next day, a resident assistant, who claimed to be a medium, offered to help us communicate with the spirit. But that is a story for another time.
Story 3. Shadow Under My Bed.
I have always been fascinated by lucid dreaming, the idea of controlling your own dreams and exploring a world where anything is possible. One night, I decided to try it. I followed the steps I had read about, relaxing my body, focusing my breathing, and waiting for the transition into a dream. Slowly, my heartbeat quickened, my limbs felt heavy, and I knew my body was shutting down into REM sleep. Then, something felt wrong. I woke up in my bedroom, but it was different. A heavy fog hung in the air, making everything seem distorted. The room was dim, the shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. I was lying on my side, unable to see much, but I could feel an overwhelming sense of dread. When I tried to move, my body refused to obey. I was completely paralyzed. That was when I saw it. A long, shifting shadow darted under my bed, too fast, too unnatural. My breathing became shallow as my mind raced. I wanted to believe this was still a dream, but everything felt too real. The room, though slightly off, was unmistakably mine. And then, the worst happened. Something began creeping out from under the bed. At first, I only saw the eyes, dark yellow, glowing faintly in the dim light. Then, it slowly lifted its head, revealing razor-sharp teeth stretching across an unnaturally long chin. It was not human, it was not of this world, and it was watching me. Panic surged through me, but my body would not move. My muscles refused to respond. The creature inched closer, its twisted grin widening, as if it knew I was helpless. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but all I could do was stare in terror as it loomed over me. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, I woke up. I was back in my bed. The air was still. The room was normal, but I could still feel the lingering presence, the weight of unseen eyes watching from the darkness beneath my bed. I have never tried to lucid dream again.
Story 4. Do Not Mock the Dead.
It was a late winter night, the kind where the cold seeped through the cracks of the house, clinging to the skin. The party had dwindled down, leaving only 9 of us. The energy was still high, but the beer was running low. That was when I remembered the garage fridge had a full case. A friend and I braved the icy steps, retrieving the drinks. By the time we got back, the beers were shaken from the journey. The first can we pop sprayed foam everywhere. I grabbed a novelty mug, one of those oversized ones that could hold 3 full bottles. Figuring a single can's foam would never fill it, I poured it in. To my surprise, it kept rising, nearly overflowing. That was when I noticed the rosary hanging from the corner of my grandfather's painting. His favorite dog sat beside him in the artwork, his stern eyes watching over the room. Without thinking much of it, I took the rosary down and placed it around my neck. Feeling playful, I lifted the mug high like a priest performing a blessing. In a slow, solemn voice, I mimicked the church's sacred chant, then lowered the mug and said, "Bless ye." I dipped my fingers in the foam, flicking beer at my friends one by one. Laughter filled the room until a sound cut through it. A soft snap. Something hit the floor. Silence settled as I looked down. The body of Christ had broken off the rosary and lay motionless on the hardwood floor. "No way," I muttered, my breath suddenly visible in the air. I knelt, picking up the small figure with trembling fingers. The room felt heavier, the air pressing down on me. My heart pounded as I carefully reattached it, returning the rosary to its place on the painting. Then something changed. The lights dimmed for a second, like a flicker of breath through a candle. A creaking sound echoed through the room. Slow, deliberate, the painting shifted. Just slightly. The dog's eyes, they seemed different, sharper, watching. No one spoke, no one laughed. We slept with the lights on that night.
Story 5. The Decrepit Hand.
When I was little, I often stayed at my uncle's place during the holidays, as I had a couple of younger cousins there. The house was old, with creaky floorboards and a strange atmosphere that I couldn't quite place. They had a guest room, where I slept most of the time, and one night, something happened that I could never forget. It was around midnight, and the air was heavy. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I noticed something unusual in the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but when I looked again, I froze. A decrepit left hand, pale and frail, slowly emerged from behind the drapes of the closed window. The fingers were curled unnaturally, with the thumb pointed down, as if it was beckoning me. It inched out, moving so slowly, yet with an unmistakable sense of purpose. The hand clenched into a fist, holding the fabric of the drape, as though it was pulling itself further into the room. I was paralyzed with fear, yet somehow I managed to close my eyes, convincing myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe I was still half asleep. I lay there, trying to breathe normally, and eventually I drifted off into a restless sleep. Years passed, and my uncle moved to a new house. The old one became infamous in the neighborhood. People spoke of strange occurrences, sightings of shadowy figures, and eerie sounds late at night. One day my cousins and I gathered and reminisced about the old house, sharing our experiences. To my surprise, my two younger cousins shared similar stories. Well, I kind of forgot, but I do remember seeing a decrepit hand coming out of the drape sometimes. One of them admitted nonchalantly. My heart skipped a beat as I realized I wasn't the only one who had seen it. I had seen that same hand, slowly, deliberately, emerging from behind the drape. Both of us exchanged glances, and a chilling silence filled the room. What had we witnessed that night, and how many others had seen the same thing? It was clear that something had haunted that old house, a presence that refused to be ignored.
Story 6. Broken Keys and the Evil Eye.
It all began in July, when my wife and I moved into a lower-level condo in the same building where my father lived. We had previously been staying in my father's penthouse condo, but we decided to move out due to ongoing issues with his second wife, which had created a heavy negative atmosphere. At first, things seemed calm, but not long after settling in, strange events started to unfold. We began hearing odd sounds around the condo. The closet, with its metal sliding doors, would make popping noises, as though something was trying to get out. We would sit on the couch watching television, only to hear a loud bang at the door, almost like a knock. I tried to reassure my wife, suggesting it could just be a neighbor outside, but as soon as I said that, a much louder bang happened right in front of me, behind the television. I froze. There was no logical explanation for it. In August, we decided to take a trip. We packed our car and bikes and drove nearly an hour away from the condo. However, when we arrived at our destination, we discovered our car keys were missing. We drive a Tesla, so the key fob just needs to be nearby to start the car. We retraced our steps, and when we arrived back home, we searched the entire condo and garage. Eventually, we found the keys broken and discarded between a speed bump in the underground garage. It was impossible to explain how they ended up there. Desperate to find a solution, my wife was advised to pray and light incense sticks in the condo. She followed this advice, praying over the space for several days. On the first day, she even prayed over me at my request. The next day, I was struck with an intense stomach issue. My body seemed to be purging itself, with symptoms far worse than usual. My wife and I always eat the same food, so it didn't make sense why only I would be affected. Some say this could indicate an evil eye or spiritual affliction. The very next day, all the strange noises ceased. The closet doors stopped popping, and the mysterious bangs disappeared. It felt as though the condo had been cleansed, and the unsettling energy had finally been lifted.
Story 7. The Whale in the Darkness.
When I was between the ages of 13 and 15, I went on a church youth trip for 4 days and 3 nights. We were split into groups of 4 to 5 people for the rooms. One group of girls was assigned a room that was unusually decorated with Islamic prayers and religious items. They didn't think much of it at first, but things quickly escalated. By the second night, the group moved out, and our pastor was called in. It turned out that someone had committed suicide in that very room, and the girls had experienced terrifying events, strange floating objects, a couple lying in bed looking depressed, and even severe back pains. In response, our pastor had them switch rooms for safety. The next evening, a girl from the group who was fascinated with horror and the supernatural convinced my best friend and me to go up to the hotel's 10th floor. It was under construction at the time, and she had heard rumors that the floor was haunted. Despite my skepticism, I was a bit foolishly brave, so when she dared me for $10 to stand in the middle of the elevator doors when they opened on the 10th floor for 10 minutes, I agreed. As soon as we approached the 10th floor, I regretted my decision. The elevator music stopped on the 9th floor, and when the doors opened, I felt an intense sense of being watched. The floor was eerily abandoned, not under renovation as we had expected. Chairs were stacked messily beneath the only working light. The exit sign and dust clouds swirled across the floor like mist. I hesitated, peeking out into the hallway that should have led to more rooms. As I stood there, the girls huddled in fear in the elevator. We all heard it, an unnatural high-pitched wail from the darkness down the hall. Panic set in instantly. We didn't wait to find out what caused it. We rushed back into the elevator and descended to safety. I still can't explain what we heard that night, and while it may sound like a trick of the mind, I assure you it was no imagination. To this day, my friends and I still talk about it, and I know that what we experienced was very real.
Story 8. The Blue Floating Figure.
This is a story my dad has told me many times, and even though I wasn't born yet, I feel it's worth sharing. It happened late one night, around 1 a.m., when my dad, aunt, uncle, and cousin were hanging out in the living room watching television. The living room was connected to a long hallway leading to the front door, and my cousin had fallen asleep on the couch, resting on my aunt's lap. Everything seemed normal at first, until my aunt noticed something strange at the end of the hallway. She pointed it out to my dad and uncle. Both of them saw it too. It was a floating figure, blue in color, and disturbingly it had no legs. My aunt, clearly unsettled, whispered to my dad and uncle asking what it could be, but none of them had an answer. They all sat there, frozen, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The figure remained motionless at the door, a silhouette in the dark hallway. Suddenly it began to float toward them, gliding slowly across the room. Their hearts raced as it moved closer. The tension was unbearable, but the figure came closer still. It seemed to draw nearer with every second, until, just as it reached the threshold of the living room, it vanished, disappearing without a trace. My family sat in silence for a long time after that, too terrified to speak, too shaken to do anything but go to bed. but they never spoke of it again until I asked them years later. My aunt believes the figure was a demon of some sort, possibly linked to my grandfather, who had been a cruel and troubled man. She feels it came from the darkness of his past. Although it was very late and they were all tired, none of them had been drinking or under the influence of anything. They all saw the same thing, and they've all experienced more paranormal occurrences in that same house. I believe them. This eerie event is one of many strange things that happened in that house, but the blue floating figure was by far the most chilling. It's a reminder that sometimes the past leaves something behind, something we can't always explain.
Story 9. The Mystery of the Moving Objects.
I was home alone one night, sitting in the living room, surrounded by the eerie stillness of the house. The bedrooms were on the other side. My parents' master bedroom, the office, and my room. Nothing else was on. No televisions or electronics to make a sound. At about 8:45 p.m., I suddenly heard strange thudding noises coming from the office. I froze, my heart racing. It sounded like the closet door in the office was being slammed repeatedly against the foldable work table just a foot away. Grabbing my gun, I cautiously approached the office. My initial thought was that someone had somehow broken into the house, but when I opened the door, I found nothing. The room was empty, the air thick with an unsettling silence, yet the closet door was wide open as if something or someone had left it ajar. Later, my brother moved out, taking 3 of his friends with him. They were a rowdy group, but 2 of his friends had stayed sober that night. They were hanging out in the kitchen when something inexplicable happened. A phone book, which had been pushed far back on top of the refrigerator, flew across the room and slammed into the opposite wall. There was no way it could have fallen on its own. Terrified, they went outside to smoke, trying to shake off the unsettling event. The strangest thing occurred the next week. My brother woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of deep guttural growling, followed by a forceful gust of air that rushed past him, as if something invisible had brushed against him. It wasn't just the noises or objects moving. One night, my mom asked me to check the television. I double-checked everything I could think of: buttons, cables, and the surge protector. Nothing seemed wrong. But something made me look at the cable cord. It was tight, secure as it should be. But later that night, I walked into the living room and froze. The cable was now lying on the dresser in front of the television, as if it had been deliberately placed there. I had clearly checked it earlier. There was no explanation for what happened, but I knew something was very wrong. I had one more eerie encounter at work in a warehouse. As I worked with my back to the wall, I felt a cold hand press lightly against my shoulder blade. I spun around, only to see nothing. I was alone. The sensation lingered, leaving me shaken and disturbed.
Story 10. The Presence That Lingered.
When I was younger, I had an unsettling experience that still haunts me today. It was an ordinary evening, but something felt off. I was sitting by my window when I suddenly heard the faintest noise, a gentle sibilant shh, like the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. The creepy part: there were no trees anywhere near my window. The sound seemed to come from thin air, right outside my room. I had always prided myself on my exceptional hearing, and I knew this noise was real, yet my mind couldn't make sense of it. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized there was no logical explanation for it. But that wasn't the only strange occurrence. One day, during a physical education class, I suddenly felt a heavy presence, like the weight of something or someone was pressing down on me. At that moment, I didn't understand why, but as I later learned, it was around the time my dog passed away. I like to think that was him, reaching out to say goodbye. The eerie occurrences didn't stop there. My teacher once shared an unsettling experience of her own. She never believed in the paranormal, but there was one event she could never explain. Her young child, around the age of 3, had started complaining about an old man standing in her room at night. At first, she thought it was just a child's imagination, but when she checked the room, there was nothing there. Her child could still see the figure and described it in great detail. This happened several times, until one night, desperate to put an end to it, she stood in the room and said, "Sir, can you please go somewhere else? You are scaring the children." After that, the complaints stopped and the figure never returned. What still chills me to the core is how those moments felt, like we were being watched, and even more so, that something from beyond the veil had a message for us. Something unexplainable, lingering, and perhaps waiting for us to acknowledge it. I often wonder if those experiences were just the beginning.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight and remember, not all shadows are empty.